Hi, welcome to Christchurch Southport. My name's Tabs, here to introduce you to the third episode of this current series at CCS Online. If you are new to watching this today, then a special welcome to you. We're a Church of England congregation at the heart of Southport with a heart for Southport. We get together in different ways. We're about building community, growing together, seeking the power of God to bring hope in relevant ways to today's society. Seeing lives changed with Jesus at the centre. As we get into this episode today, I want to invite you in a moment to set aside this time just to be still, to ready your heart and mind to step further into the presence of God. There'll be a psalm on the screen, and I'd love to encourage you to pray that you would find the faith and hope to hear God speak to you today as we carry on this series. After that, we'll head over live to hear this week's message from our Sunday morning in-person gathering, have some music, and before we finish, here's some ways you can continue to connect with CCS. But before all that, here's a little bit of who we are.
So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the golden scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king." When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions.
Brilliant. Okay. Sorted. Start myself a timer so I don't, go on too long. I wasn't looking at anyone then, Rob. Okay. So the story of Esther is one that I have looked at before. But as somebody who works with children and young people, we often explain this story to children in a really child-friendly-ish kind of way. We say Esther was a queen and she stepped up for her people who were going to be killed. And we kind of, try to dull down some of the bits that are a little bit tricky. Because when you actually read the book of Esther, it's actually quite ridiculous, and it is also not child-friendly. This is a really not child-friendly story at all. There's a lot of, we'll call it moral ambiguity. There's a lot of things that are a bit suspect. There are also things that are just completely wrong that happen, things that are not good, that are not right, that are not okay. And there's a whole lot of death. So, it's not normal bedtime reading, but it is an incredible story. It's absolutely incredible. There are these moments that are kind of ironic, but really quite darkly. You'll see when we get there, really darkly ironic, but kind of quite hilarious at the same time. And then you've got these extra bits that are these really unlikely coincidences. These things that happen, and you just think, ooh, that's interesting. And the thing is that this is the only book in the Bible where God is not specifically mentioned. It's interesting. You see, the people seem to have forgotten him, but he has not forgotten them. He's not forgotten the promises that he made to them. And he might not be mentioned by name, but you can see him weaving throughout this story, working behind the scenes. And I think if this story was made into a TV series, it would be number one on the streaming services right now. Like, it is incredible. Like, it's the kind of thing that you wouldn't go, oh, we'll watch one episode today, we'll watch one next week. It will be we'll watch the whole thing, because every episode would end in a cliffhanger. And people would be like, oh, we have to watch this because this is incredible. They'd be telling all their friends, you've got to watch this series, it is amazing. And it reminds me of this game that we sometimes play with children. I don't know if you've ever played it before. It's called, Fortunately, Fortunately, this thing happened, and you start to make up the story. But then the next person says, but unfortunately, this thing happened. And gradually, they create this story that goes up and down. It's a complete roller coaster of a story. It's very good for car journeys, in case you ever need that one. And the story of Esther is just like that. It's a complete roller coaster. And as I've mentioned at some points, it is utterly ridiculous. But it's such a good story that I feel like I have to tell it to you because it is that good. So you need to get your popcorn ready. We're going to do some Fortunately, Unfortunately with Esther. But first we need a little bit of backstory. So the Jews were in Israel. They'd been conquered by the Babylonians and then they'd been exiled. So they'd been taken away from Israel and they were made to leave and they were scattered throughout the Babylonian Empire. But then the Persians defeated the Babylonians. So there's a lot of war going on. And the Jews were then allowed to return to their homeland. But some of them didn't. They stayed in Persia and they became like Persians. And it appeared that they'd forgotten God. And so the story of Esther is set in the Persian capital, Susa. And the king at that time is called Ahasuerus. That was his Hebrew name. And his Persian name is... he has a Persian name, but it's a little bit too much for my dyslexic brain. So you can look at that yourself. You can work that one out. But fortunately, even though his Greek name has two X's, it's the easiest of them all. So his Greek name is Xerxes, which we often hear in different translations of the Bible. So we're going to call him King Xerxes, because that's where I'm at. So, you ready for our story? This is the story of Esther. It's incredible. Get yourself prepared. It's a long one, but it's a good one. Okay, so Esther 1. The story starts with Xerxes the king. He's the king of Persia, and he throws a 6-month party. I told you it was ridiculous. He threw a 6-month party to tell people how incredible he was. But unfortunately, the men had way too much to drink, and the king sends for his wife to entertain them and display her beauty. Fortunately, Queen Vashti says no, and she will not be put on show in front of all of them. Unfortunately, the king was furious, and his advisors thought that Queen Vashti's actions might cause a rebellion amongst the women. Oh dear. So he issues a decree that Vashti would never enter his presence again and the men would take charge of their households. So Esther 2. Fortunately, when the king searched for a new queen, Esther was there. A beautiful Jewish girl brought up by her cousin Mordecai. Unfortunately, her parents died, but fortunately, Mordecai was there to raise her. Unfortunately, Esther had to complete 12 months of beauty treatment. Yes, 1 whole year of beauty treatment before she could even go and see the queen. I mean, I am a fan of a spa break. Anyone that knows me know. I am a fan of a spa break. After 12 months, I would be so unbelievably wrinkly. I don't quite understand what you can do for 12 months of beauty treatments. But anyway, the story goes on. Fortunately, Esther won favour with all who saw her, and the king chose her as queen. But she didn't yet reveal that she was a Jew. Unfortunately, there was a conspiracy to kill the king. Oh no. But fortunately, Mordecai was the one who found out. Interesting that he found out. And he told Esther, and Esther told the king. Credit was given to Mordecai, and the men trying to kill the king were killed. Esther 3. Unfortunately, there was a man the king honoured called Haman, who convinced the king to destroy all the Jews because Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him. He convinced the king, this king's an absolute pushover, convinced the king to kill all of the Jews because of one that wouldn't bow down to him. And the date of their destruction was decided by the roll of a dice. And in Hebrew, a dice is called pur, and we'll see that a little bit later on. Verse 15 literally says, the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered. I would be bewildered if that would have happened. It's completely ridiculous. So Esther 4. Fortunately, Mordecai wouldn't stand for this, and he got word to Esther about the plan for this mass killing of the people and urged her to plead with the king. Unfortunately, if Esther goes to the king, she might be killed. Double unfortunately, if Esther doesn't go to the king, she will be killed, and so will all of her people. Fortunately, Mordecai encourages Esther that perhaps she was in her position for such a time as this. And Esther agrees to go to the king after her and the people have fasted for 3 days. Unfortunately, she might face death, but she said, if I perish, I perish. Esther 5. Fortunately, when Esther went to see the king, he didn't kill her. Phew. She knew the way to his heart. She was clever. So she invited him, prepared a couple of banquets for him, and he brought Haman along as well. But unfortunately, Haman still hated Mordecai for not bowing down to him. So, are you ready? He had a 23-meter pole built that he would ask the king to impale Mordecai on. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Esther 6. Fortunately, the king couldn't sleep. And with his bedtime reading, apparently, listening to the record of his reign, so apparently that's what you do when you're king and you can't sleep, listen to the record of your reign, and he realised that Mordecai hadn't had any recognition for exposing this plan to kill him. Interesting coincidence. Happens to not be able to sleep on that day. Happens to hear this story about Mordecai. And this is the turning point in the story. Unfortunately, Haman didn't know about the king's sleepless pondering. So when the king said to him, what shall I do for the one the king delights to honour? Haman presumed it was him and said, you should put one of the king's royal robes on him and parade him down the street on a horse that the king has ridden. And fortunately, the king says, go and do that for Mordecai. And Haman, unfortunately, is fuming, absolutely fuming. Esther 7. Fortunately, on the day of the second of Esther's banquets for the king, he asked her what she wanted. She asked for her life and the lives of all her people to be spared. Unfortunately for Haman, the king asked who had dared to plan to kill her and all her people, and she responded that it was Haman. Fortunately, are you ready? This is great. Fortunately, there was a 23-meter pole already set up right next to Haman's house. So Haman was impaled on the pole that he had built for Mordecai. It's completely ironic and completely ridiculous. Esther 8. Esther tells the king that Mordecai is her cousin, so he was given Haman's signet ring and his whole estate. But unfortunately, the edict to kill the Jews was still in place, and the king couldn't overrule a decree that he had made. So Esther pleaded with him to do something. But fortunately, he issues a new decree for the day that was decided by the roll of the dice that the Jews could defend themselves against their enemies. Esther 9, we're nearly there now. Unfortunately for their enemies who thought on this day that all the Jews were going to be killed, the enemies were overthrown and they were killed. So the story ends how it started, with a party. And the annual celebration of Purim was established. Pur meaning dice in Hebrew. And in Esther 10, Mordecai's greatness is included in the king's tribute. What a story. Do you see what I mean? Do you see why I had to tell you the story? It's absolutely incredible, an absolute roller coaster ride. And as I said, it's the only book in the Bible where God isn't specifically mentioned. Yet there are all these ironic reversals, all these coincidences, and you can see what God is doing all the way through. And I don't know about you, but I see these kind of coincidences in life as well, where God steps in but chooses to remain anonymous. And there are a few things I'd like to pull out of this story, particularly where we see courage. And when people and he wants courage so that he won't be afraid. But that's not the point of courage. Courage isn't about being fearless. Courage is about being afraid but doing it anyway. That is what courage is about. So let's pick out a few people from this story. So firstly, we've got Queen Vashti and her dilemma. Queen Vashti doesn't get a lot of talk about her, but she does something that's absolutely audacious. It's absolutely unbelievable in that time. You see, she's in this compromising situation. She's ordered to come and show off her beauty to a bunch of men who have been drinking and partying for 6 months. And the writer doesn't say exactly what's involved, but it probably would have been really degrading. And Queen Vashti doesn't want to do it. She doesn't want to do what has been asked. She knows it's not right, but she also will have known that there would have been consequences to her saying no. And often we think of consequences and we think of, if we do something wrong, there will be a consequence. We teach children about actions have consequences. And we think about, if I break the law, if I do something that's not good, what will happen? But consequences can happen because of things we do that are right as well. All our choices have consequences. And last week, we thought about integrity. And many times I've heard integrity. And it is the same all the way through. When you cut into a piece of rock, whatever the pattern is in the rock, whether it says Southport, you see it all the way through. And people of integrity are the same, no matter where they are, no matter who they are with. And Queen Vashti shows integrity here in our story. She did the right thing, even though others weren't. Even though it was difficult. Even though there might have been dire consequences. Right is right, no matter what other people are doing. If other people are doing completely the opposite thing, right is still right. And as I said, courage is not about being fearless. It's about being afraid, but doing it anyway. And sometimes it takes courage to have integrity. Courage to stand up for what's right. Courage to go against the crowd. Courage to say no, or courage to say yes. And we see that with Esther too. She has courage to do what is needed. So in Esther 4, when Esther's communicating with Mordecai about the edict to kill the people, it says this, and it'll be on the screen. All the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. And when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish." You see, if Esther didn't do it, God would have done it another way. He made a promise. God's plan will not be thwarted because we don't do what he's calling us to do. He'll do it through someone else. But he gives us the opportunity to get involved in what he's doing. He's all powerful. He could do it all himself. But he doesn't. He allows us to join in with his rescue plan. What an incredible privilege. And he orchestrates these incredible coincidences that put us where we need to be for him. So what's God calling you to do? And where's he? What is your for such a time as this? Esther knew what needed to be done. She knew that she was the one perfectly positioned to act. And it took courage. Courage to do the right thing. Courage to stand up for her people. Where's God placed you? Where it takes courage to stand up for him. And courage to stand up for others. Courage to tell your friends, your family, your colleagues, school parents, children, grandchildren, all about who God is and what he has done. It can take courage to be a Christian. Although when I think about this, I do feel slightly ashamed when I think about some Christians across the world. Christians who are persecuted, who are imprisoned, who are killed for their faith. And they don't back down. And they keep going. And we need courage to be more like those Christians. To share our faith no matter the cost. And we don't know the consequences of that. Perhaps someone will think we're really strange because we believe in God who, we can't put right in front of them and show them physically. But perhaps they won't. Perhaps they'll think it's incredible that we believe in someone who they can't physically see for themselves. And perhaps they will say, how do you know that God is real? And perhaps you can share your story and tell them about what God has done for you and what he could do for them. We don't know the consequences. They might be amazing. And there's so many times in life when I have noticed these incredible coincidences that I might, share with other people about, where something has seemingly gone wrong, and I had a plan, and my plan failed, and something happened that wasn't what I had planned. But then what actually happened in the end was so much better. So much better. I don't know whether that's happened to you before. Was God acting anonymously? Or was he using a negative situation for good? I don't know. But either way, it's great. Either way, God is evident. So the last person we need to consider is Mordecai. And Mordecai, again, doesn't get quite as much said about him. Most people talk mainly about Esther, which is right. Esther is the hero. But here, Mordecai is also a hero in this story. And Mordecai's not a perfect Jew. So remember, like others, he chose to stay and live as a Persian rather than go back to Israel. But he was a man that was so evidently full of compassion. And we see this. However, either way, she's likely a lot younger than him, and he takes her under his wing and brings her up as his own. And when Esther's taken into the palace, she's got her year of ridiculous beauty treatments. Every day he walks up and down the courtyard trying to find out how Esther is. He really cares about her. And when he found out about the plot to kill all the people, he wore sackcloth and ashes, and this was a sign of immense grief. And he felt compassion for the people. He wanted to show a visible reminder of what had been decided by the role of this dice. So how can we show compassion to others? How can we show people that we are with them through thick and thin? We are with them through whatever they are going through, that we have not forgotten them. Compassion can require courage. We think about people we don't know. What about people we do know? What about what they're going through in life? How can we have courage to act? Courage to be there when you just don't know what to say. I just don't know what to say to this person. I don't know how to help them. Courage to be there with them through it all. And Mordecai, like Esther, he stood up and he did what was right. And he was the instigator. He was the one who encouraged Esther, and he gave her courage. Encourage literally means to give someone courage, to fill someone else with courage. And that's what he did. He spoke wisdom and he spoke hope. He said, perhaps, Esther, you're here for such a time as this. And we all need those people around us who encourage us and they help us to do what is right, even though it's hard. Incredible. It's up and down, and it is very, very challenging, and I hope you felt that. So I've got some questions for you. Do you need more courage to have integrity, or more courage to have compassion? Do you need filling with courage to do what is right, even though it's hard? You can pray and you can ask for God's help and strength. He does not leave us alone. He does not leave us on our own. And we can ask other people to encourage us and to help us. Where have you acted courageously in following God? And is God calling you to be more courageous for him? What are you really willing to risk for God? Is he calling you to stand up for him? Is he calling you to stand up for others? Is he calling you to have the courage to act on your compassion? And what is your for?
Weapon may be formed, but it won't prosper. When the darkness falls, it won't prevail. 'Cause the God I serve knows only how to triumph. My God will never fail. Oh, my God will never fail. See a victory, I'm gonna see a victory, for the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory, I'm gonna see a victory, for the battle belongs to you, Lord. Yeah. There's power in the mighty name of Jesus. Every war he wages, he will win. take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. Yes, you do. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. Yes, you do. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. 'Cause I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Oh, I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Yes, I will. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Oh, I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. To you, Lord. To you, Lord.
Brilliant. Hopefully you've continued to sense God speak to you through our third episode of this series. If you'd like to take this week's message deeper and see it grow and shape your faith even more so, then we've got some questions in the description or comments for you to spend some time reflecting on, either on your own or together with others, growing together and supporting and challenging one another. Then, if anything has spoken to you in this episode, do get in touch, either through the CCS office or the YouTube comments. And if you want to stay connected, there's a whole bunch of stuff to get involved with across the CCS family. If you'd like to connect with one of our missional communities, blessing our town of Southport, just contact the office if so. Or if you just want to keep up to date on all things Christchurch, you can get yourself on our weekly emails or check out this week's CCS news in the episode description or our social media channels as well. On that note, do remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the notification bell to make sure you never miss an episode. And if you do that, then I'll see you again in our next episode. God bless you.